everyone. So, I am a LARPer and a LARP writer, and a lot of you may know me from that context, but in my real life, I'm a biology professor. And I teach a lot of pre-med, upper-level physiology. And for those of you who teach at the college level and even at the high school level, there's a lot of material. And figuring out how to balance interactive and memorable and really engaging with all of this, with getting through the material that you are required to get through so that your students get the boxes checked off for the tests that for the MCAT that they need to study for and all of those things. This is a really hard balance, and this is, especially in the sciences and some of those, this is something we struggle with a lot. And one mechanism that a lot of people really like that strikes a balance on these is case studies. And so I'm talking about taking case studies and taking this tool that we already use a lot and bringing it into a somewhat more engaging and interactive variant. Case studies are great. They're active learning. We're getting students out doing things, engaging with things. They teach through stories. We all love stories, right? Everybody loves stories. We think about in stories. We tell about our lives in stories. And they increase student engagement. And they also allow us to focus on real details, real nitty-gritty details of material that we need our students to have exposure to. But the traditional case study design is interactive and engaged in a very sort of limited and focused way. You start with a story, and then the students get the story, they go do some research, they get what the information they need to understand the questions, and then they answer some questions, some of which are going to be basic research questions, and some of which are more complicated thought questions where they might need to make decisions. And then they may or may not get another piece of story and do this again. Now, I'm combining this with another setting that a lot of you probably have some experience with, which is tabletop RPGs. So there's some similarity in what's happening in these two worlds, right? You have a setting, you have a story. But in tabletop RPGs, you've got a world that's moderated by a GM. In most tabletops, this is the style that I'm focusing on. There are some tabletops where that's not true. And players take on specific roles in this world. Now, there are some case studies already out there where players do this, where you take on specific roles. And then decisions are made by those players that impact the game world. And that's the really important part, is that when you're only writing down your answers and turning them in at the end, they don't have a real impact on the world that you're dealing with. And that's what I'm trying to bring in here. So that makes the diagram a little bit more complicated and harder to read in this light, so I apologize. These colors show up better on my screen. So we'll talk it through. So first, to make this work, there's some amount of outside prep. Now that's usually going to be the case for a lot of these, sort of often referred to as flipped classroom activities, where students do more of the, instead of I stand up here and I lecture like I am doing right now, the students do readings and watch video lectures beforehand. Then they answer questions online so that I know that they've gotten the idea, and that they also have a chance to ask me questions. And we use those questions that they've asked online I'll give a short lecture where we answer the questions, and so now they've read their background material, they're ready to move forward, I've answered whatever questions they had about the background material. And now we can, and so that's, out of class readings, questions on the readings, short lecture based on the student questions, and then we're ready to get to the story. So the story can be anything that relates to what the class is working on. Is what's happened so far in this world. Now, the examples I'm going to be using are physiology, because that's what I teach, but it really doesn't matter. The one nice thing about physiology is when we're talking about case studies, we can often use medical cases. Most of my students want to go on to health careers. Some of them want to be want to go to med school, some of them want to go to dental school, some of them want to go to PA school, but that large majority of my students want to go on to medical careers. So if I hand them a case study where they're dealing with a sick patient, I've got their attention immediately. This is something they care about. So this is going to have a story with what's happened so far. It's information on the key points for research. For example, here's your patient presentation. Here are your symptoms and your findings, what you have so far. Now, this is going to include a lot of it, like, well, here's your blood pressure. Well, is that a normal blood pressure? You might have to look that up. Here, things like that. So, things that they're going to have to do some research on. Now, they do this work in groups. I like groups of 4 to 6. They're good. Those are good numbers, mostly 4 and 5. But there's a lot of flexibility there. And then within that, hey, you know what 4 or 5 sounds like to me? That sounds a lot like a D&D party. It's a really good size for a lot of tabletop RPG groups. So they take on roles within this. And in my class, again, most of these are pre-health students, so you might have the surgeon, and you might have the dietitian, and you might have the person's primary care physician, and you might have an oncologist. And those people will go then do research on whatever is particularly relevant to their specific role. So often early in the semester, if I do a lot of these, I'll mark out like, these are the things the surgeon should be researching. And here are all the specific roles. Later in the semester, once they're more used to this, they might pick what roles seem relevant to them in this case. And once they've done that research, they'll make some initial decisions. Now, in the case of treating a patient, this is often going to be things like, what tests do we need to run? Is there any treatment this patient needs urgently now before we get to the results of this treatment? Will this patient die if we don't stabilize them right now? That's more important than any possible test you could be running. And then they present those decisions to a GM or facilitator, who in this case is the professor. And then in response, they get the feedback from those decisions immediately. So, did you successfully stabilize your patient with the actions you took? What are the outcomes of the tests you ran? If you ran a scan, here's your actual, here is an image of what you found on this scan. And then using that gives them more information and gives them a little more story that they can then iterate, do more research, make further decisions until they reach their final outcome, which hopefully in my class is successfully, diagnosing and appropriately treating this patient. And then they will write up their results of their tests and their final outcome, and how all of this went. So this allows them to engage with the world in a much more active way. Overall, this has been very successful in classes. Students rate, as you can see, over 88% of students in these classes rated these as either effective or very effective. 74% of the students said that the course using these case studies helped them to think independently about the subject matter more or much more than other courses. And just a few student comments that I really, that came from these questionnaires. The case studies, ahead. The case studies are extremely helpful in understanding the material better and making sense of body systems while connecting different ones together. I really liked the case studies that were part of the class because it helped me to go step by step to diagnose our patients through this iterative process. And of course, I felt like house. Which again, these are almost all pre-health students, so they really enjoy that aspect of it. There are some limitations to this system. It is very teacher time intensive. I prepare as much as possible the responses to the decisions I think students are going to make in advance so that I can just send them out. But I have never yet run one of these case studies, even one that I've run 3 or 4 times before, and not had at least some group ask me for something or decide to do something that no group had ever done before. So some amount of on-the-fly decision-making, just like in a tabletop game, sometimes the GM needs to respond to the participants deciding to go off in a direction they hadn't prepared for at all. That happens in the classroom as well. It also really, really only works with students that do having done the preparation already. So I have not tried this in a lower level class, and I don't teach at the high school level. I think it could be done, but you would have to find a way to make sure that the students are doing the preparation, which can be a lot less consistent in lower level classes. I've done this with upper level undergrads and grad students. And I haven't done any direct effect testing on the actual effect on student learning. But overall, this can be a great way to encourage agency and engagement while still allowing a lot of very detailed focus on some of the fine-grained material that is necessary in upper-level college courses. And thank you.